Okay, we are live. Welcome to our Q&A recap and Chinese concept review for the China Myth podcast. So now we are in Ep.7. Again, season 1 is going to have 10 episodes. I've recorded 8. I've written 9, so I got one more to go. I'm really excited. So I hope you're getting what I want you to get out of these podcasts, which is a greater understanding of things that you weren't aware of before you listened. And now maybe it makes a little bit more sense. And maybe now you have a little bit more context. All right. So, again, anytime you want, you can type your questions into the chat. Even when this live video is over, it's all on the YouTube channel, so you can always go back and you finish an episode, you can go back and just type your questions here, and I'll be monitoring them and eager to answer your questions. All right, so today the title is Anatomy of Accidental Chinese Grievances. Okay, so we all know that when we're doing business across cultures, there's going to be misunderstandings. Okay. Now, if you're an American like me or you're from a Western culture, the chances are you may cause some accidental grievances or accidental feelings of somebody of being wronged. Okay. And in Chinese, it's called wěiqu. And that feeling is whenever somebody in China perceives that they've lost something of value. Okay. And the context behind Chinese culture is every Chinese person's most valuable asset is their face. So whenever you say something that quote unquote is disrespectful to Chinese culture or whatever, you may cause a Chinese person to feel wěiqu. Now, it's very nuanced because what we in the West have now observed is the Chinese government is really stepping up propaganda about everything that the West does and everything that the West says is somehow disrespectful to China. So there has to be, in Western terms, it's really difficult to communicate an idea or a belief or a preference and not accidentally cause Chinese people to feel wěiqu. So in the next episode, or in one of the final episodes, we're going to talk about a concept called 台阶下, which means it's, you can say something wrong or you can accuse somebody of doing something that they actually did, but it's causing them a loss of face. But what you want to do is you want to give them a way to save face, okay, a way to step down from the spotlight of disgrace gracefully. And if you can do that, it can help massage and manage a lot of the problems that you accidentally encounter because of your values and your ideas that are actually different. Okay, so by no means am I asking you to change your values. I'm only suggesting that you understand in China, the only thing that is important, it's what you say and how you say it. That's the only thing that matters. It doesn't matter how you feel. It doesn't matter what your opinion is. It doesn't matter who's right and who's wrong. It only matters what you say and how you say it. And if you can say it with a smile or a different attitude, then generally that will take you a lot further. If you say something in disgust or kind of you're almost in shock or you're disbelieving that somebody could think that way or behave that way, then even if you say the right things, you're going to convey the wrong message. Okay. So what we're really doing now is we're kind of going, it's a progression of the different concepts that you need to not just familiar yourself with, but basically you need to embed them into your own thinking and psychology, into your mindset and your mentality. Okay, so we started off in episode 1 with, wěiqu and why is it important, and is it important in forming successful partnerships, and what are the pros and cons of wěiqu. And then we get into the Chinese person's system of values and how they calculate whether it's worth it to develop wěiqu or not, and we call that wěiqu. And in the case with Richard, his wěiqu calculation told him that it wasn't worth it to deepen wěiqu with me, because when you deepen wěiqu with somebody, then you're left with greater obligations and expectations on both sides. And if you're skeptical that this person can ultimately benefit you more than they can hurt you, then that is your internal calculation. So again, one of the things that we always stress that was really important about the wěiqu is that it's based on perceptions. It's not based on truth. It's not based on facts. It's only based on perceptions. And our goal is to influence the perceptions of the people that we work with in China in order for their own internal wěiqu considerations or wěiqu calculations to change. And you want them to change in a manner where they suddenly feel that they are able to deepen wěiqu with you in a different way. Okay, so let's see. First question has come in. So before we get into some of the concepts, let's see what this question is. Business in China is very deep and nuanced. If you're asked to speak before an organization like the American Chamber of Commerce, what bullet points would you highlight? Okay, so again, that's actually a very interesting question. So first of all, we got to put that into context. Me speaking in front of American Chamber is basically how on a macro level, the U.S. government should represent its citizens abroad. What services do we provide? What opportunities do we provide? What opportunities for engagement do we provide as the American Chamber of Commerce? It'll be interesting, I'm not sure of the answer yet, is whether that is similar to the advice that I would give an individual. Okay. But I think this episode is bullet point by bullet point the things that you would highlight. As a Chamber of Commerce, if you want to facilitate better cooperation between the American businesses doing business in China and the local Chinese government officials, state-owned enterprises, and people in China, it really, yes, it comes down to a lot of economics and opportunities, but really it's the interpersonal relationships. So I think it's cliche to say you need to focus on wěiqu because it, in a vacuum, that word and that concept really doesn't mean anything. So I would actually say what I said at the beginning of this is Americans need to recognize that Chinese people don't think the same way as we do. Okay. And in order for you to get your point across, what matters is not only what you say, but how you say it. And usually it means how you say it is in what context do you say it in, and what is your attitude if it's different than what people are doing in China. Okay. Because the problem that most Americans have is when they go to China, they're critical. They're not only critical, they're hypercritical. And that is reflected in their attitude. So that's why at the beginning of all this, we talk about the mindset adjustments that you have to make. And then we talk about, well, how do you change your mindset? Because we grew up with a certain system of values. Well, it's not about really changing what you believe. It's actually developing a wider perspective of how other people may feel, which leads to being more empathetic. Okay. And one of the things that we really talk about is in order to do that, you have to use more imagination. You have to use more positive imagination. And you also have to use purpose-driven curiosity, because only through curiosity can you actually start to give people the benefit of the doubt instead of being judgmental, which is ultimately leading everybody down a negative path when one side is judging the other side. Okay. So all of this actually makes sense, because what we're trying to talk about here in episode 7 is how do we as foreigners accidentally cause Chinese to have grievances or to feel 委屈, and what are the biggest challenges in that regard? So I think the biggest challenges is, number one, sensing when you've made someone feel 委屈, and then 2, deciding whether it's worth making adjustment. Because my guess is 90% of the time, even if the majority of foreigners doing business in China knew that what they were saying was causing someone to feel bad, they wouldn't care, because it's more important for us to express our values and what our policies are. And then the challenge is, how can we accomplish both at the same time? How can we communicate our goals in a way that's more acceptable while not causing them to feel 委屈? And how can we persuade them that this is something worth listening to and understanding, because you haven't forced it down their throat, so to speak. Okay. So those are the things that we really want to talk about. And again, it's all derived from the wěiqu considerations that we talked about started off in episode 2, but I think we've talked about it throughout. And what are the pros and cons of deepening guanxi relationship, and what can we do to change someone's wěiqu calculation? Okay. And what do we really need to understand? I think what we first of all need to understand is that wěiqu is dynamic. That means it's not a static consideration. Oh, Chinese people believe this and they're not going to accept this. wěiqu is not that. wěiqu is really, at any moment in time, what do they feel is the benefit of deepening guanxi relationships, and how do they expect that could evolve over time, depending on whether you deepen guanxi or you don't deepen guanxi. So at any point in time, they have a consideration, and the point is, it's influenceable by you. You can influence their wěiqu calculation in a more positive way. And as you're influencing that wěiqu calculation, what you're also doing is you're changing the communication patterns. So if you've been working with your employees for a long time, the same employees or the same partners, and every time it's the same argument or the same disagreement or same lack of consensus or same frustrations, well, if you make the adjustment to really based on their wěiqu calculation, then you can influence them to want to deepen the guanxi, because now they see more upside potential over time. So that is something that's really nuanced. And I'm hoping that by listening to the podcast, you can get more of a feel of why certain things work and then why certain things don't work. So let's talk real quick about the characters that we've talked about so far in this podcast. We talked about Vincent, who was the partner that I met at the Blue Marlin Bar and Grill. And so the question is, did I ever make Vincent feel 委屈? And I think in retrospect, yes, I did. Quite often. I don't know that was the reason why our partnership failed, because that had more to do with how I was working with his wife, Grace. But how could things have been different had I paid more attention to things that were making him feel wronged or left with some type of grievance? That is always something that we should pay attention to. and a lot of times when Li is in balance. Okay, so one of the differences is my Li consideration with Vincent was 50-50. It was 50-50 equity, 50-50 partnership, and we both didn't have any relatives or other guanxi connections attached to the business. So our Li was essentially equal. And so when I said things that I knew made him feel bad, it was always in the context that I wanted to try to emphasize a point that was counter to his. And that's one of the things that you're going to experience a lot in China, is that most of the time you're going to be trying to make a point. And your point is going to be counter to what you perceive their position or their values or their point is. And that's why you get these circular conversations. A lot of times you just got to let it go. And that's really, really hard to do. That's probably not the reason why my partnership with Vincent didn't work. In fact, I had a pretty good relationship with Vincent. So if ever I went back to China, nothing would probably change. We could still be friends. We could still shoot pool, and we could probably start another partnership together if the opportunity came along. Now, with somebody like Jack, ultimately his bad behavior was because of the accumulation of his wěiqu feelings, because we didn't respect anything that he said, because we didn't feel we had to. I mean, we basically took this almost homeless person, cleaned him up, dressed him, got him shoes, trained him, gave him an office, gave him inventory, taught him a business, and made him a 老板. So along the way, we felt consciously or subconsciously superior, which means we never really had to worry whether he felt wěiqu or not. So because we never paid attention to that and we never thought we needed to, he ultimately decided to take actions to maintain his status and his guanxi relationships that were counter to ours. I mean, the case study is lie, cheat, and steal. That's what he did from us. And we describe that as just goodwill extraction. So we weren't reciprocating to him the goodwill that he needed to maintain his guanxi connections. And so he had to extract it from other parts of the value chain. In his case, it wasn't even necessarily for 灰收入 or gray income. It was just he got into a position of authority and status, and he needed to preserve his face, which means he needed to reciprocate to everyone in the value chain in order for him to do what he needed to do, which is maintain that business. So a lot of things that we could have done differently with that. Now, Xiao He, who was my personal driver, I don't really think I ever made him feel wěiqu, mainly because I was disproportionately curious about everything that he had to say and everything that he might value and he might be interested in. And that's the reason why we were able to develop such close guanxi relationships, in which I was eventually able to access this whole network of unofficial resources to get things accomplished in China. Okay. That's of course not what we're encouraging, but you feel more like you can succeed in an environment when you can access both the official resources and the unofficial resources. And then what you choose to do with them and whether you ever choose to use them or not, that's a different story. That then falls on your own system of values and what you believe, but that doesn't prevent you from developing the relationships to actually access them, but then never utilize them. Okay. And then I think finally, Richard is someone I think, Richard had a different wěiqu calculation that I didn't recognize soon enough. And we're going to talk about that in episode 9 of this podcast, where we talk about his 心态. 心态is a combination of his psyche and how he feels and what he perceives. And there's a whole combination of emotions that reflect a Chinese person's 心态. One of those is paranoia. One of those is laziness. All right. And one of those is ambition. And in Richard's 心态, where his paranoia prevented him from seeking to deepen guanxi relationships with me. He was obviously doing something that would be considered corrupt or unethical by Western standards. And I never gave him the indication that I would turn a blind eye. I think we use the Chinese term 睁一只眼闭一只眼, and so because we were never able to, or I was never able to kind of convince him that I too was corruptible and would be interested in participating in some of these things. He just felt that he had to protect his own self-interest. I was a threat to everything that he had created over the last 10 years before I became a paratrooper manager, and I was suddenly this foreigner or outsider in his territory managing whatever he was trying to accomplish. So if I would have taken a step back earlier and had the experiences that I have now back then, I would have taken a completely different approach. I still may be at that company now, and Richard and I would be flourishing in that environment. But that's the lessons that you learn over time. And I'm sure a lot of you who have been doing business in China for a long time have learned a lot of those lessons. The real question is, what adjustments can you make and should you make? And by listening to this podcast and reading it on Kindle Vella or listening to these YouTube lives, what adjustments can I help you make? Just, even though you've had these experiences, what deeper understanding can you achieve in order for you to feel like you have options? Like, you can always choose to behave differently. You can always choose to turn a blind eye. You can always choose to make someone feel better, as opposed to make someone feel that they're wrong by giving them a lecture. And I think foreigners doing business in China try to lecture Chinese people way too often. And even when you, on a diplomatic level, when Chinese wolf warriors say, we're not going to be lectured by the West. Well, when they say that, all the Chinese citizens applaud that, because their experience with foreigners is being lectured. And if you put that into context, then maybe as a foreigner in China, you might choose a different path in how you communicate or persuade someone to take the action or behave in a way that's more conducive to what you're trying to accomplish. All right. So wěiqu is the main Chinese concept. It's still related to guanxi and liyi. And after wěiqu, we're going to get into 心态 and 交流. There's a whole spectrum of how Chinese people feel. And if you understand each one in the context, then you're going to be able to perform much better in China and not accidentally cause Chinese grievances. There's a couple of other Chinese concepts. 放你一马 means I'm going to forgive you. Yes, you did something that made me feel wronged, or 委屈. You did something that normally isn't forgivable, but I'm going to forgive you. I'm going to 放你一马. That's a Chinese term that we used in this episode 7. And the other one is the opposite of 放你一马 is the 算账, which means settle the score. Okay. And that's the danger, because Chinese people communicate in a much different way, which means they hide their grievances, but they don't forget them. And in their hearts and in their minds, they're always thinking or looking for an opportunity to settle the score or to get even, especially if they've been wronged by somebody with a deep 关系 relationship or a close 关系 relationship. And that means to 算账 or settle the score. So this is the dynamics that are at play. How do you get somebody to 放你一马 or to forgive versus hide that grievance and eventually 算账, which is to get even? That's a delicate balance. And there's no one size fits all answer to say, okay, if you do this, you're going to be able to achieve this. It's all about really immersing yourself into wanting to understand how Chinese people think and how they feel, so you can change their 利益 calculation. You can influence their 心态. You can not cause them to feel 委屈. And then ultimately, through a combination of that awareness and empathy, you will be able to create new patterns of interaction and communication that are much less frustrating and much more collaborative. And you're going to be able to achieve a much more rewarding journey into China. Okay, so if there's any more questions, you can type them into the chat now. I've already gone for almost 30 minutes, which, unless there's a lot of questions, I typically don't want to go too long because a lot of people might be watching this on the replay. Again, if you have any questions, you can always come back to this video, type them into the chat. I want to thank the people who have remained online. I can still see that you are there. Thank you very much. Looking forward to seeing you next week at the same time and hearing what you think of episode 8. I actually don't remember the title of episode 8, but I'm sure it's a continuation of everything that we're talking about so far. All right. Take care, guys. Thank you.